Hey everybody, just a warning before we get started. What I'm about to show you is so shocking that the President of the United States of America has demanded an apology from it, and many, many evangelical Christians are shook to their core about how awful it is what this person said. So I just want to give you a quick warning before we get started.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families. Some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals.
Oh, scandalous.
She was so arrogant. The way she didn't even acknowledge the President of the United States of America.
Yeah, she didn't even acknowledge the president, except for the part where she acknowledged him.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President.
She had an opportunity to minister the gospel. Instead of that, she is a heretic. She should never be allowed to preach the message of Jesus in her life because she's not even talking about Jesus.
Yeah, she didn't even talk about Jesus.
In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus of Nazareth exhorts us to love not only our neighbors, but to love our enemies, and to pray for those who persecute us, to be merciful as our God is merciful.
Or at least she didn't make Jesus say the things that conservatives want Jesus to have said.
It was designed to insult him publicly in front of the whole nation, and it succeeded.
An openness to one another across our differences, because in fact we are more like one another than we realize, and we need each other.
But of course they're upset. If Jesus were to say the words he said today, he would be called a woke rabbi pushing his DEI agenda, and they would crucify him again. Good Samaritan? How about all lives are good? Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. This verse is quoted so much these days by evangelical pastors, and it's usually just to dismiss someone who was simply asking for the slightest bit of empathy. I think it really applies to these people who call someone asking for love and mercy the work of the devil.
Satan, presenting himself as the angel of light, as always, presents the version of God the world wants. And all the world is watching, and they're super happy that the Christian representation just rebuked him. If a Christian speaks and all of the world is saying that's the version of Christianity we like, something is wrong. Jesus didn't lie to you when he said that you will not be loved, you will be hated for his name's sake. And if they wanted to kill Jesus off his words, if you repeat his words, it will never end with people saying that's what we need to hear. No.
Because they support this man.
2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:17. That's the whole ball game. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. I am the chosen one.
I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there, and she was married.
Footage from 1992 found in the NBC archives shows the future president welcoming Jeffrey Epstein to his Mar-a-Lago estate.
And by his own admission, he was no stranger backstage while owning parts of 3 different pageants for nearly 2 decades.
They're standing there with no clue. Is everybody okay? And you see these incredible looking women. And so I sort of get away with things like that.
By the way, your daughter.
She's beautiful.
Can I say this? A piece of ass.
Yeah.
She looks more voluptuous than ever.
She's actually always been very voluptuous. She's tall. She's almost 6 feet tall.
79-year-old Ryder sued the former president last November, alleging he raped her in a department store dressing room in the mid-1990s, and then defamed her by denying it ever happened.
Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts, the first former president to be convicted in a criminal trial. He will now be a convicted felon, go down as a convicted felon in the history books. And Sumi, of course, on the ballot in November, voters will now have to contend with if they are comfortable voting for the Republican presumptive nominee to run the nation's highest office, to go into the White House when he has been found to be a convicted felon who was interested in corrupting the 2016 election to get into power.
Oh, they were comfortable with it. In fact, they loved it. But apparently it doesn't matter anymore because empathy is a sin now. Hey everybody, thank you so much for liking and subscribing and commenting and everything else. You're just so wonderful. I have the links down below for the Patreon and the merch and the other social meds, which are changing up a bit because of all the craziness happening in the world right now. So check those out. Find me on all the platforms. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. In other words, this is the whole ball game.
That's the whole ball game.
And we remember when Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself. Or in Romans where it says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Most people would look at those verses and say, you know what? I think that the Bible might be telling us to have empathy. But apparently not.
We live in empathetic times, and no, this is not a good thing.
You're kidding, right?
We also live in a time of increasing fragmentation and polarization, resulting in virulent forms of tribalism. Back in the day, when we were faced with old school tribalism, the tribe was an objective reality outside yourself, and it set one's baseline. This was when tribes had names like Apache or McGregor. As a result, members of a tribe tended to grow up with a fixed loyalty to that tribe when considered against all others, and empathy was out of the question for others. It was doled out accordingly. What was good for the tribe defined everything, and you empathized with a fellow member of the tribe simply because. Less to no empathy was accorded outsiders. In other words, tribal membership determined the empathies.
Oh, the good old days, where you could hate people based on their nationality.
In our fragmented times, we are seeing the opposite, like a river reversing course. Instead of tribes, created by geography, ancestry, and language, establishing our empathies today are now establishing our tribes. Shared sentiments now harden groups into tribes, complete with tribal loyalties. I was once walking through a major city and passed the Center for the Empowerment of Deaf Alcoholics. That's an example of hyper-specialized empathy.
Hyper-specialized empathy. Isn't that like the whole point of empathy? That each person is different and on their own journey, and in order for us to live in peace, we should recognize that. But also, many deaf people have trouble communicating with people who don't know sign language, so it makes sense that a group like AA, where you are encouraged to talk to each other, would have a group specifically aimed at people who are able to talk to each other. It takes 1 second of thinking to understand this. It takes the smallest amount of empathy to understand this. But Dougie here would much rather be upset that there is a group that he can't join. Probably because most clubs in the world would never want him as a member.
Sorry, not you.
Doug.
Why not? But you let in
Doug.
Clumplet.
It says no.
Doug's.
We're allowed to have one.
Which will result, in the long run, in a fairly small and exclusive tribe. Sort of like the White House press corps. Often drunk, never listening.
We get to do jokes? I love comedy.
So I want to preach a message today titled, When Empathy Becomes Sin. When empathy becomes sin. Help me, Jesus.
Help him, Jesus, indeed. Help him teach the exact opposite of what you did.
To preach this message, I believe that this will help you understand a lot of the root cause of a lot of the craziness in the world.
Today, we are going to talk about the dangers of one, maybe two concepts. It depends on how far we get. Two traits or characteristics, if you will, that we have been told are universally positive, but are actually dangerous and destructive. And that is number 1, empathy, and number 2, inclusion.
So the one thing about the Bible that almost everybody would say is a positive message, we're just going to chuck that part right out.
Here's what happens. Empathy has become a cult. And what it does, it says that we want to reduce the standard, lower the standard for the least healthy, least mature member of the community. And once we do that, then someone less healthy arrives. And eventually we've eroded all standards. And in the name of compassion, healthy, strong, competent, capable people, starting with heterosexual men, no longer feel welcome. And what you see is in the cult of empathy, the least healthy people are welcome and God is not.
See, that's exactly what I'm talking about, human empathy. It's as useless as the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, when we say mega is a cult, they get defensive. But wanting to have basic empathy for a fellow human is a cult.
We're going to spend our time trashing empathy. Like, doesn't empathy just mean putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand how someone feels, to comprehend their position so you can listen to them, learn from them, and then potentially, if necessary, advocate on their behalf?
Yeah, that's right, but I don't think she's using the right tone here.
Like, what could be wrong with that? Isn't empathy what helps us be less judgmental and kinder to people? And then inclusion, how could that be bad? What's wrong with trying to bring more people into the fold, making sure more people feel seen and heard? Shouldn't we, especially as Christians, be creating a more inclusive and empathetic society? Like, isn't that what Jesus would want? Isn't that loving people, loving your neighbor as yourself? The answer is, though, I've realized over time and after some thought and some reading and some investigation,
and while needing to support a fascist in order to keep her job and keep her hate-filled audience,
that the answer is actually no. The answer is no. Not only should we not be prioritizing empathy and inclusion in our own lives, prioritizing, I mean every word. So make sure that you're listening to what I'm saying. I'm not saying, as I will talk about, that we shouldn't care about these things at all, but we should not be prioritizing empathy and inclusion in our lives. We also shouldn't be pursuing these as top societal values.
It's about fixing the Bible and adjusting your own moral compass to better align with your politics.
Because I hear Democrats say a lot, and you've pointed this out, that progressive Christians allow their politics to drive their theology, not the other way around. And so I hear a lot the justification of Christians who vote Democrat by saying, I'm voting for the least of these. I'm voting for the marginalized. And I said, look, I'm actually voting for the least of these because the least of these is Jack Phillips. The least of these is the persecuted Christian who, for the sake of biblical values, has been absolutely harassed and a victim of lawfare by progressive activists for the past 12 years. So when I'm actually looking to vote on behalf of the least of these persecuted Christians, I want to vote for the party that best upholds their liberty, that's not going to put pro-lifers in prison the way the Harris and Biden administration is, but it's going to pardon those people. That's like Romans 13, governments are instituted by God to reward good and punish evil. I see the Harris Biden administration doing the opposite.
But it's not like that. The conservative values say that a human being can be illegal, and the Bible says to clothe and feed them and treat them as equals. So they twist the Bible so it doesn't say that.
In the Bible, we see very clearly that everywhere a wall is mentioned when it comes to a city, it is literally or metaphorically a symbol of protection and provision and security and stability. A man without self-control is likened to a city without walls. That means you are very vulnerable to attack. And actually, when we look at the beginning, God places man in a garden, not in a jungle, but a garden with parameters that is meant to be worked and to be kept and to be cultivated. We see that heaven itself has walls. Walls are symbols of security. God placed us in a country. God placed us in a nation with a government. Those were his ideas. Laws were his ideas. And so all of these things are for the safety, security, and the flourishing of human beings.
Walls weren't there to stop illegal immigration. They were a defense against warring nations. They were there to stop armies. There are plenty of verses about how to treat the immigrants in your land. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. They adjust their Bible to fit their political views. It's why evangelicals spend so much time talking about the definitions of words instead of doing anything, instead of actually talking about the issues at hand, because they need a distraction. Because it doesn't matter how everyone uses a word. What matters is that they find a loophole so that they don't have to be held accountable.
There's a modern term that's all the rage today. It's empathy. Empathy. Whereas sympathy is to suffer with, empathy is to suffer in. This term, empathy, was invented in just the last 100 years.
So first, let's talk about what empathy is. It comes from the Greek empatheia, which means in a state of passion or emotion. And I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of the German word of empathy, which came around in about the beginning of the 20th, end of the 19th century, which is Einfühlung. I think that's how you pronounce it, which literally means in feeling. It was built on that Greek word.
And then empathy is this more modern term. It was like invented in like the 20th century. It's not like this ancient word or this older thing. It's invented in the 20th century, and it means to suffer in. So that's kind of the key like linguistic deal. And I think
why does it matter when a word was invented? The concept of empathy has been around forever. Language is constantly changing. There aren't too many words that we use that existed 1,000 years ago, the same way they exist today. That doesn't mean they aren't useful terms. That doesn't mean they aren't real words.
And for a long time, it communicated something like, try to put yourself in someone else's shoes and see the situation or the suffering from their point of view. Now, if asked, a lot of Christians would say empathy sounds even better than sympathy. Empathy seems like a more virtuous type of compassion, a more loving way to treat people. And maybe it was originally kind of like that. But this term empathy has been corrupted and co-opted by the critical theory, pro-victim, demonic agenda.
That's just a way to dismiss people who want everyone to be treated equally. Because you can't go against all the people wanting equality, you have to call them the critical theory group. Because calling it what it is would make them sound like the bad guy, and they are trying to avoid that.
Both sympathy and empathy can be harmful. Both can be destructive, but especially empathy. So how? Because feeling too much for someone can blind us to reality, a reality that is bigger than someone's experience and pain. It can make us forego principles that are higher than this person's experience and pain. It can cause us to ignore the truth, the objective truth, in favor of how a person feels. So when we allow someone's pain to become our own pain, we then become unable to separate feelings, which are subjective, from reality, which is objective.
Or that feeling too much for someone could mean that you have to stop being mean-spirited. Because why care that families are being torn apart, and why care that refugees are being sent back to a place that wants to kill them? My audience hates them because they aren't white, so I have to hate them too.
She calls all of these people asylum seekers and says they've all been vetted. Why do they have to go home? And J.D. Vance has a response to that. Here is SOT 7.
Well, Margaret, I don't agree that all these immigrants or all these refugees have been properly vetted. In fact, we know that there are cases of people who allegedly were properly vetted and then were literally planning terrorist attacks on our country. That happened during the campaign, if you may remember. I don't want my children to share a neighborhood with people who are not properly vetted. And because I don't want it for my kids, I'm not going to force any other American citizens' kids to do that either.
No, and that was a very particular case. It wasn't clear if he was radicalized when he got here or while he was living here.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
Yeah, so that kind of became the meme yesterday. That became the rallying cry. It's like, make America great again, and then I don't really care, Margaret.
Nothing says that I don't have sympathy or empathy better than I don't care, Margaret.
That's, now we need hats and we need t-shirts that when Vance runs for office, in 4 years. I don't really care. Margaret needs to be on the red hats that he sells.
Have you checked all these people's identification cards?
No, we haven't done that. Why would we have done that, GI?
To see if there are any known Nazis.
You don't kick full nationalities of people out of your country because some of them committed crimes. If we did that, we wouldn't have any people left, because it's not about where somebody is from. It's just that some people, some human beings commit crimes. You prosecute the people who committed those crimes. You don't kick everyone out who happens to kind of look like them.
Because so empathy is the sort of thing that you've got someone drowning, or they're in quicksand and they're sinking. And what empathy wants to do is jump into the quicksand with them, both feet. And it feels like that's going to be more loving, because they're going to feel like, I'm glad that you're here with me in the quicksand. The problem is you're both now sinking. Right? Whereas if you do, I'm going to keep one foot on the shore, and I'm actually going to grab onto this big branch, and then I'll step one foot in there with you and try to pull you out. That's sympathy. And that's actually helpful, but to the person who's in there, it can feel like you're judging me. So
metaphors are great because they help to explain what you were trying to get across in a relatable way, and more people can understand it. The problem is when people dive a little too far into their metaphor to the point where they are no longer talking about a real thing in the real world. Empathy is not a body-switching comedy. We aren't doing a Freaky Friday. When you put yourself in someone's shoes, that's a metaphor. When you feel what they feel, that's using your imagination. You are still you.
I'm me?
Hey, don't jerk me around, fella.
That we need to be careful so that we don't only fall to the temptation of arrogant judgment, that particular sin, but that we also don't fall into the same sin that individual is committing. That as we seek to restore someone caught in sin, there may be a temptation to join them in that particular sin. And I think of empathy in those terms. A lot of times what people in our culture, what they desire is not actual solutions to their problems, to their suffering, not actual help or aid, but instead what they desire is just for us to perish along with them.
According to the world, this is how you empathize. According to the world. This is according to the National Council for Mental Well-Being. Here are some of the keys to empathy. First, if someone's hurting, you should listen non-judgmentally, they say. So, I'm not judging you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to accept everything as you say it. It sounds nice on the surface, but what it requires you to do is turn off the part of your brain that sees the difference between right versus wrong.
Empathy isn't a treatment. It's not a separate thing from sympathy. It's not the opposite of sympathy or compassion. It's not the advice you give. It's simply a method to give you a little bit more perspective before you get to any of that. It's not the judgment itself. It's how you get there.
Empathy, according to the world and modern psychology, says you got to remove all of your biases and preconceived notions when you're listening to someone sharing their point of view. Now, again, on the surface, that sounds good, but they would even include your preconceived Christian notions. So yeah, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman because the Bible says so. They would say you got to let that bias go in order to be empathetic to LGBT people.
My dad, who is no longer with us, didn't have the most progressive views when it came to the LGBTQIA community. But also, I remember once when I was a teenager, he met a man who was upset, and my dad asked him how he was doing. And the man told him that his boyfriend had broken up with him. My dad didn't start telling him he was a sinner who was going to hell. He just said, yeah, it's really hard to lose someone, isn't it? I'm so sorry you were going through that. Because he understood that whether or not he agrees with how that man was living his life, he knew that this man was going through a hard time. And he knew that if he lost somebody and somebody started giving him a lecture, that he would be very upset.
The world says, in order to empathize, I've got to validate their feelings and experiences. Like whatever you feel is right, and however you say it happened, we're going to just say that's how it happens. If I ask questions like, well, what did they say? What did you do? That's not being empathetic, they would say. And then they will say, you should listen without any advice being given. Don't give advice, just listen.
Listening without advice doesn't mean that you never give advice. It just means you listen, empathize, assess, and then give advice if appropriate or if asked.
Yeah. Empathy is the means, the conduit by which relativism is pouring into counseling.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So because the question of what really happened is made secondary to the emotional state of the person in question. Right? So that becomes the end-all, be-all of everything, and any challenge to that is a threat.
I talked to my therapist at one point about something my friend posted online and how it affected me, while also admitting immediately that I misread what my friend said and that my friend didn't mean it the way I read it. I understood their intentions by the time I got to therapy. I understood that I misread what they said, but it also brought up feelings. If my therapist had just said, so they didn't actually say anything to hurt you, so you shouldn't have been upset, so there's no actual problem, that really wouldn't have done much, would it? Instead, we talked about why it affected me, regardless of the intention. We talked about how I dealt with it, what I learned from it, and how to approach it next time. I was wrong about the situation, but I wasn't wrong about the way I felt. So we worked on both. I know I have to work on thinking about it and rereading it before I react. But I also know that there's a reason I have those feelings.
That was good breakthrough.
Yeah, but that didn't solve anything.
It's not about solving. It's about communication and empathy.
Screw empathy.
But they won't acknowledge that because it's about othering. It's about judging. So they find a way to play the definition game, and they find a way to make empathy a sin. Not because they care about correct definitions, but because they don't want to have to take a look at themselves.
I don't get it. No, I don't understand.
You're overreacting, dude. I didn't get into college, and check me out. I'm kick-ass.
They don't want to adjust their behavior. They don't want to treat people as they would like to be treated. They don't want to love their neighbors as they would want to be loved. And they can't say that they are being empathetic when they aren't at all. So they twist the definition. So when someone says you aren't practicing empathy here, they can say good because that's a sin. When really what that person is saying is that you aren't behaving like Jesus told you to behave. But they can't admit that they have no desire to act like Jesus told them to act. So they continue to look for verses that they can twist and they can make say what they want it to say.
Remember this, the prodigal son, it says, after he had spent on lavish living all of his inheritance, he was off in a distant land and a famine came. And he got a terrible job, low-level, entry-level job, feeding pigs. And it says that he was so hungry that he was looking at the pods, the food, the pig food, and longing to be filled with it, wanting to eat the pig's food. And then there's something else that we often forget. The text says, and no one gave him anything. What incredible love. And the immediate thing that follows that, no one gave him anything. And then he came to his senses. And he said, the servants, the slaves in my father's house have it better than I do. I should repent. I should go home. I should go back to my father. And he's rehearsing his repentance speech the whole way home. So what changed his mind? What made him say, I'm going to repent. I'm going to change my ways? Well, he came to his senses. And what made him come to his senses? No one gave him anything. Did you know that handouts damn people?
That was obviously not meant to show how loving anyone was here. It was meant to show how hard the world would be without Christ, without returning to God. There are plenty of verses where you are told to feed people, to house people, to clothe people, but he chose to take a verse meant to show how hard the world can be to say, see, we aren't supposed to help people. Because he doesn't let his theology guide his political views guide his theology.
First of all, that's a parable about grace, not faith. Also, the prophet in that story is Elisha. Gehazi's his servant who he cursed with leprosy. I learned this stuff when I was 7. In a coloring book.
Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or are sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life.
Luckily, there's someone on staff who's an expert in both medicine and the Bible. Also the sequel to the Bible that my grandpa wrote.
Yep. You mentioned that I'm being likened to a Nazi. Well, that was Russell Moore in the pages of Christianity Today in a very passive-aggressive way, because he didn't like how I interpreted a verse in Matthew 25. I said a very mainstream view that when Jesus is saying the least of these, he's actually talking about persecuted Christians. Now,
That's what a Nazi would say.
Christians are called to care for the poor elsewhere, but in that particular passage, he is talking about how we treat his people is basically how we treat him. And Russell Moore said that that's basically an interpretation that a 20th century German soldier would have, which is an absolutely, it's so absurd, it's hard to even engage with it.
Of course, American evangelicals are not the least of these, besides maybe in critical thinking skills. Russell Moore wasn't wrong here. This is a fascist ideology. She's actively finding a way to remove any reason to have compassion on people who aren't like her. Jesus said that it matters how you treat the least among them, so they find a way to make it so it's not that.
Oh boy. Nazis.
Just like how these same people use the part of the Bible where Jesus says that the poor will always be with us as a way to say that they shouldn't work too hard to help the poor. Because you can use the Bible to say whatever you want the Bible to say.
Emotion. And emotion, while it absolutely has its place and is natural, it very often ignores facts.
Every argument against trans people is based on unfounded fears, not on facts. It's not the trans people in bathrooms assaulting people, it's cis people. It's not drag queens in libraries touching children, it's youth pastors and priests.
He provides so much comfort to those in need, the elderly, the infirm. But don't worry, I don't let him around the kids.
What's that supposed to mean?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. And that's priests, not chaplains. Not all priests, but of course some.
But mentioning that hurts their feelings and goes against their narrative, so they ignore it. They say immigrants are on welfare and leeching off the government, but do ICE raids at places of employment? That's not facts over feelings.
So it used to be when you were, debating someone or talking through an issue, your debate would be based on logic and reason and facts, and maybe you'd give your credentials, like your personal accomplishments, your education, your professional background. But now it's very different. People today, they preface their arguments or they preface their statements with all their victim credentials. They got to lay all their victim cards down on the table. So I could be here, I could say 2 + 2 = 4. That's just a fact. And someone who is steeped in critical theory would say, well, I, as a disabled, transgendered, female immigrant lesbian, say your understanding of math is based on your white, male, patriarchal, Western privilege.
That's not victim credentials. You're not a victim because you're disabled. You aren't a victim because you aren't cis and straight. People are just acknowledging where their perspective is coming from to give context to what they're saying. Someone who is black is going to experience life differently in America than someone who is white. That's just a fact. Someone who is disabled is going to have a different experience than someone who is able-bodied. Someone who is LGBTQIA is going to have a different experience than someone who is straight and cis. Ryan mentions his race and gender and sexuality all the time, but he doesn't see that as playing his victim card.
This is why a lot of people, they cringe. You might not even realize this is why you feel some of these emotions. Some of you cringe if I talk about something like abortion because you think, well, you're a man. Who are you to talk about that? Or if I talk about something like racism, you say, well, you're white. You can't talk about that. But when I read the Bible, I noticed that skin color is not what qualifies you to speak the truth. No, nor does sex. But the truth is just the truth. Popular culture and critical theory today, your pastor, as a white, straight, Christian, able-bodied, fourth-generation American male, I'm basically Darth Vader. I'm the bad guy in all the Hollywood movies.
Because what he's doing is actually playing the victim. You ever have somebody in your life who deflects criticism by taking it to the extreme? I've known a few people who have parents like this, who if you point out anything that they did that even slightly hurt you, they just start saying, "Oh, I guess I'm just the worst mother ever. Oh, I guess you have a terrible father," because it ends the conversation. I had a friend who would always criticize me, but if I ever called him out on anything, he would go on about how he was a giant piece of shit who could do nothing right, and he was constantly letting everybody down, instead of just acknowledging the one thing I asked him to stop doing. And he did this because it's a deflection. He wanted me to comfort him and tell him he was a good guy and a good friend. Or even if I didn't do that, at least he knew that acting that way would make me not want to call him out in the future because I want to avoid a similar meltdown. That is what not taking accountability looks like. Taking any criticism directed at white cis straight men and saying that, "Oh, I guess I'm just Darth Vader," that is the same hissy fit. That is the same deflection. And of course that's not true. You're not Darth Vader, Ryan. Darth Vader had a redemption arc.
All of this is really tough for the Christian because we have a high view of the individual. We have a high view of human beings.
I'm not sure that's true, but go on.
Being made in the image of God. So that means we believe that their feelings and their stories matter. We don't just look at people as data points or as statistics. We actually do care about their personal experiences. And I think the desire to fix someone's circumstance or to assuage someone's fears or to link arms with them and say, "I will fight this battle with you," is good. I think it is even Christ-like in some ways. But again, when we are led by things and feelings that aren't true, we can actually be aiding and abetting in someone's destruction and societal destruction rather than something that is good.
She's currently supporting Trump's internment camps. I'm not sure if we should really take her at her word here.
All of the preventable crimes. Citizens commit crimes too, but all crimes by illegal aliens are preventable. All of these preventable crimes took place that represent a loss of life, a loss of dignity, a loss of property, a loss of economic opportunity. All of those were the result of a policy choice. We are seeing that now, that Trump has accomplished more in 5 days when it comes to immigration than Biden did over 4 years and over 4 decades. In Washington, D.C. You're going to see a lot of gaslighting, a lot of toxic empathy from Christians,
What if she pointed out a crime that a Jewish person did and then said, if we didn't have Jews in our country, then this crime wouldn't be happening? What if she said, if we didn't have black people in our country, then these certain crimes wouldn't have happened? People didn't come to America because their lives were super easy and they just wanted to change. America was seen as a safer place to raise their children. It was seen as a place where they didn't have to constantly look over their shoulders. Allie has children. If she lived in a place where she was afraid that something would happen to them, she would do whatever she could to protect them, including, I am sure, that she would smuggle them out of their country. What are the words carved on the Statue of Liberty? Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
And here's the order of deportations. First, we'll be rounding up your tired, then your poor, then your huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
Breathers. Got it.
America used to encourage immigration. They did have open borders until 1875. There were no laws preventing anyone from immigrating and becoming an American citizen. But then in 1875, it was decided that they didn't want Chinese women to enter America, so they passed their first immigration law. And then in 1882, they banned all Chinese men as well.
That was doing so racist.
Are you kidding me?
In 1917, further laws were created to make it harder to immigrate to America, which included a list of undesirable races. American immigration laws have always been racist. And even now, these so-called illegals use social assistance far, far less than the rest of the population. They add so much to society and culture, they pay taxes, and they are still used as scapegoats anytime there are any economic problems. It is way easier to just other an entire group of people than to call out politicians, corporations, and billionaires that is actually causing the mess. It's almost like people haven't seen Wicked, or that one Simpsons episode.
Are these morons getting dumber or just louder? Dumber, sir. They won't give up the bear patrol, but they won't pay taxes for it either.
Ducking this issue calls for real leadership. People, your taxes are high because of illegal immigrants. That's right, illegal immigrants. We need to get rid of them.
Immigrants. I knew it was them. Even when it was the bears, I knew it was them.
And no, The Simpsons did not predict the future. This is just a tale as old as time. Other people, other races, immigration has always been used as the main scapegoat to our problems. Would you want to constantly have to prove your citizenship because of the color of your skin or your accent? Would you want to be shackled and taken to Guantanamo freaking Bay for a civil offense? Because that's what this is. Being undocumented is a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter. It's literally the same as being shackled up and put into a concentration camp because you built a fence too far over on your neighbor's property. Or should we separate our feelings from facts and realize that society is better with diversity, not worse? Would you want to be told that you can't get medical care because someone in a religion that you don't practice doesn't agree with that type of medical care? Would you want to be told that you can't marry the person that you love and who loves you? Two consenting adults who love each other because somebody else thinks that that marriage is gross? Empathy is so important for society to work, and the only people who would ever make an argument against it are the people who benefit from the suffering of others.
There are people constantly looking to play victim cards, and they're constantly getting offended. They're constantly filing HR complaints.
Uh-oh, did someone file an HR complaint against Ryan?
They're constantly making everyone feel really awkward because just deep down we know it's not supposed to be this way, where everyone's looking for a reason to be offended or to be a victim. Our secular progressive culture has elevated victims to the point that now everyone wants to be one. Think about how crazy and backwards that is.
Only the oppressor thinks that someone fighting for change is playing the victim card. They don't want to live in a society made up of different people with different backgrounds and beliefs. They want a society full of clones of themselves. They want to be a hive mind. They want to be the Borg, and they want their government to make it happen. The problem is, though, that in America, they already have the government in their pocket, and we have already seen how disastrous this way of thinking is. But just remember that when they get rid of one group, they don't stop there. Once their so-called illegal immigrants are gone, once the Muslims are gone, once all the trans people are gone, once all the gay people are gone, they don't say, okay, good, it's over, because they are always going to need scapegoats. When they get rid of everybody who doesn't look like them, when they get rid of all the non-Christians, then they start weeding out the wrong types of Christians. Then they start weeding out the right type of Christian who doesn't support the right people. We all know the poem by Pastor Martin Niemöller. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. It's time to speak out. For some people, it's too late. We waited too long to speak up. But we definitely can't wait any longer. Enough is enough. Donald Trump is threatening my country, as well as Greenland, Panama, Colombia, and more. I have a trans sister living in America right now who is married to someone of Mexican descent. I'm scared. My family's scared. And if you aren't scared, then you aren't paying attention. It's time to get radicalized. It's time to speak up. It's time for empathy. Hey everybody, thank you so much for making it this far. It wasn't an easy one. If you know someone who may benefit from watching it, send it their way. And this time I don't really care if it's passive-aggressive. Be passive-aggressive. Change needs to happen. You're all the best. Love you so much.
Work, Sky Moon.